Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. So one of the listeners posted a very interesting comment that sort of is going to be the catalyst for this episode, and that's why your comments are so valuable. It's funny, I just thought about it. You know, I probably get more episodes out of you guys just talking to me than you guys giving me a specific episode suggestion. Please don't stop doing that, but you guys just being smart, it's just great. I love it, man. But this person said, hey, you know, if Tesla had succeeded, we're going to get into the explanation of this if you don't know anything about what he's talking about. If Tesla had succeeded, all the birds would be dead. And it really set me back. I was like, well, that's interesting. You know, would they be okay? And the funny response I put back, at least I was trying to be funny, was that the only thing that Tesla was rumored to really have been in love with, besides in his autobiography talking about one woman that he was attracted to that liked him as well, but they just didn't feel like they had the romantic connection, was a bird, a dove, a female dove that used to fly into his window at his, I believe, just his last apartment in New York. Because for those of you who didn't watch the Tesla history episode, recapping his entire life and then going for the death ray at the end, which we'll review in this as well in part. He used to just bawl in hotels, man. Like, he loved hotels, and especially when hotels started putting in AC power, which he's responsible for creating and perfecting, he wouldn't touch a bird. I mean, if he had found that he was hurting birds, which, you know, we will never know because the Wardenclyffe Tower was just never finished. You know, JP Morgan made him tear it down. So I thought it'd be amazing to do an episode to think, okay, I'm overplaying those words. It would be amazing. No, I mean, I thought it'd be cool and fun to do sort of some forward thinking about, you know, what if Tesla had erected the Wardenclyffe Tower and the world had seen that you could broadcast power at a low frequency into people's homes, into devices, and have it metabolize, you know, caught and metabolized into higher power. The thing could be distributed around the house, around a room, and you know they would have been able to do peer-to-peer servicing of the same thing, meaning instead of like a big Wardenclyffe Tower doing what it does, sending it to some sort of Tesla coil in your house that then brings it in, amplifies it up, and then gives it to the devices in your home, your house would look like his laboratory as documented by Mark Twain. None of your devices would necessarily have to have any wires ever. Everything would be a variation of induction. And of course, the dude, had he successfully turned it on, let's say around 1920, because let's say he finishes it in 17, never runs into any financial problems. He'd need a few years to perfect it, but that was his genius, is perfecting electronic components to take advantage of the stuff called ether that creates all electricity that you know and all the mass in the universe as you know it. Now, I don't know, I'm going to say that my 2 ethereal episodes will most likely be out before this one's out. I created 2 ethereal episodes, and I want to create some 3D animations to assist your mind when contemplating these things. And of course, particle systems are not easy things to just throw around until you really figure them out. And because I'm trying to do very specific collision models, currently they're going to help you, but they won't be 100% accurate. And so I'm just trying to help out the process, because once you guys see it, you'll see it. But I may have found some words that I can put in this episode, maybe even air this one first, letting you know these other 2 are coming, and so that they're a little bit more understandable. Because like I've told you guys, when I found Eric Dollard, who turned me on to ether, because I'd heard about this stuff my whole life, and then I was told it didn't exist, and then it made sense to me. Like, it took about 5 years to totally click, and I mean the last 12 months, the level of clicking for my brain for ether and the whole universe, it's just absolute. I see the whole thing now. There's no point in this solar system, in this galaxy, in this place we are, whatever you want to call it, matrix, where this stuff can't be easily accounting for everything you've ever seen, including some of the anomalies that we see. And I would say only shy of perhaps a soul showing up and being an apparition to you, in a mind's eye apparition or whatever. We can talk about those. We've talked about those at length. But in terms of just sheer tangible mass energy, it all connects, man. And it connects at a level that's ridiculous. And again, it connected to the point that E=mc² was a submitted concept to the scientific community 1 year before Einstein was born. So if you want to throw that guy's name into it, save yourself a ton of embarrassment for your future. So where to start? So Tesla, as I said in my episode on him, which I believe is 500, he was a super sweet human being. He was so sweet that he was easy to manipulate, easy to steal from. For those of you who simply don't know anything about Nikola Tesla, the easiest way to think about this man is that he literally grew up in, what was be equivalent to like Borat's story of growing up in Kazakhstan. I mean, just in the middle of a farm community. The inventions that he came up with was so astronomically far away from the world that he grew up in. Today, if you became an electronics genius and invented something new, it'd be very difficult to prove to, not that you have to, of course, but this differential between where you grew up and where you found out something, it would have to be like a kid climbing around junk piles in Uganda trying to find enough scratch to live off of, somehow getting over to one major country of another, which this has actually occurred, and having them put together all this stuff. But even with Tesla, you're talking about he's coming over to America saying, I want to pioneer AC power. And the only dude in town was Edison doing DC. And he's saying, look, I'll give it to you, man. Just finance it. And Edison was so bullheaded, having been a slaughterhouse worker before he became a DC expert. He just couldn't see it. He just couldn't let go. And I think, quite frankly, this is in retrospect after I made that episode, Edison couldn't understand AC. That had to have been a gigantic portion of it. It's almost like, someone has thrown everything into Newtonian physics, and here comes some relativity and he can't understand, or someone threw themselves into relativity and they can't understand quantum physics, or quantum physics, they can't understand the next phase, right? Which would be ethereal sciences coming back. That, because as soon as Edison would have conceived of what Tesla conceived, they would just kind of look at each other and go, oh my God, that's so simple. Of course that's logical. We have flowing rivers and we can create generators, and I've studied transformers and generators more and more since the last time I did that episode. Step-up motors, step-down motors. And just because I know that the more I study electronics and the flow of electricity within various configurations to accomplish various things, from telephones to radios to televisions to integrated circuits, ICs, it all just starts to make sense. But because there are very few things, if anything, I don't think there's a single thing metaphorically I can give you that mirrors the way ether works, such that you just go, oh, except for maybe, this is not even an exaggeration. Let's say you're watching a movie, some science fiction movie. A lot of Star Trek episodes in the 90s did this, but a lot of shows have done this, where you have some sort of apparition of a spirit. With Star Trek, it was great because it didn't have to be human. It could be a gigantic blob of energy that's, falling on top of the Enterprise, and then stuff starts happening, right? And when you see this blob go through a wall, into a person, into a component, into, something, a wire, you immediately go, well, of course, the spirits can go through all mass. And so, yeah, of course that can happen. And so you're getting an inkling of how ether passes in the universe. The only thing ether because every single thing in the universe is ether. And this is very important to understanding how Tesla would run the world, or what components he might have continued developing to secure the world's peace, to make sure that poverty is just, it's impossible to have poverty. You have to understand, when you think about like a water going through a hose, because they always teach electricity, usually with a metaphor of water first, and it's not a bad metaphor. But if you could think of it as ether, man, electronics becomes just almost instantaneous. Now, it doesn't become super easy to tell a microchip what to do or to understand a CPU or something like that, because it's very similar to the rules of a complex game like chess. There's very few rules to chess, but everyone knows that the logic of playing someone across the table from you, it's all based on the thought processes of the person across from you, looking at your moves. And, you can't play chess today in the 21st century for probably 50 moves without someone saying you're copying another game that's super famous. You're doing the so-and-so move, because it's been done so many times, right? But with the chaos of ether, well, you're never going to predict anything. It's so chaotic. And when this stuff slows down, because there's so much of it in the universe, passing through all things, passing between, it's basically particles that pass between each other, and they're just bouncing off of each other. When they start bouncing a lot and getting stuck, because there's a bunch of it kind of conglomerating on various paths, right? It's like when you look at an artery and you zoom up and you see all those red blood cells going foof, foof, foof through the cells, through the veins, right? And they're making Y turns. There's a Y in the road, and some of them are going right, some are going left. Just imagine that 50 times the speed of light on average, and it's super duper packed, but there still is space between them. When they start banging into each other, they start making shapes. And when they start making shapes, you and I can start sensing them. The shapes that they make start turning into things like perhaps a sphere, which is a very natural shape in history. In history. It is, but it's a natural shape in random chaos of, an empty space. And those spheres start behaving as another thing. We start giving it a different name. And then they start banging into other spheres of the similar size, and they start making bigger spheres. And we start calling those different things. And this is where you get all the components of atomic matter. It's just this incestual thing. And everything, when it turns into a sphere, I should say this, it is always spinning. And it spins with a pole system in it. So there's a north pole and a south pole to any sphere that spins. If you do not have a north pole and a south pole, think about it. You can't spin anything. Every time you shoot a ball in pool, no matter how you shoot it with the cue, you could slow down the camera and study how it's rolling, and you could arbitrarily say, one side's north, one side's south. The way that we would look at it in a ethereal way would be, it might be the case that there is a point where, as this object is renewing and it's getting, you basically go into a sphere. If you're an ethereal particle, you go into a sphere, you spend some time there bouncing around, and then you come out and you go off to another sphere. And so you're just in there temporarily. And so that creates, usually the North Pole is the entry point and the South Pole is your exit point. All right, so you're starting to understand this stuff, right? What you have to understand about when they teach you electronics through water, they'll tell you about hoses. They'll teach you that the speed of which the water goes through the hose is voltage and the diameter is amperage. So it'd be like a pressure versus volume. Okay, great. But the problem with that analogy is that it teaches you that there are things that can absolutely hold in. And this is still true, but it's for a different reason. They'll teach you that there's containers for this stuff. And then outside the hose, well, are your hands wet if you have a brand new hose and you got everything screwed up tightly? Well, only if when it sprays out of the end, it blows back on you because of wind, or you're hitting yourself with it. That's the only reason why you're going to get wet. With ether, the stuff is everywhere, penetrating everything all the time. The only thing that we do is that we know that certain substances in the universe are very conductive, which basically means as this stuff is bouncing around, there's some sort of aperture for it and a flow where these particles, you just chilling out in the universe, just bouncing all around as an ethereal particle, you see this surface, this certain type of conductive material, and you're like, oh my God, there's the super slide down at the park. And so you hop in and you ride the wire until you pop out and you go off to some other component somewhere in the universe. You could become a human for a split second. You become an air molecule for 1 second. That's how this stuff works. And I think that's what Tesla completely and utterly understood. He understood the whole universe is made out of one stuff. Of course it's made out of one stuff. Maybe it's different sizes at different times to make sure that we have chaos, but that creates life. But that's something we'll find out at some future point in time. Maybe Wolfram's right. So Tesla doesn't die. And let's just say we're going to rewind this whole story of Tesla's world, not Elon Musk's thing, which is kind of funny. I'm pretty sure Elon Musk's lithium battery cars are actually running on DC and not AC. I haven't completely checked it out, but I'm pretty sure that's what's going on, which is sort of funny. They're calling it that. You should call it Edison. So we have to look at it like this. Tesla would have always engaged in things that benefited the world. Again, if he'd ever found that he had hurt an insect, a bee, a bird, he would stop the presses and fix the problem. He probably wouldn't sleep until he did it. Come the popo. So we do know that, I think we're pretty damn sure that broadcasting the billions and billions of hertz into the atmosphere is killing off bees. It's confusing their pole system. It's got birds falling out of the sky. It's got fish in the ocean going the wrong way and beaching themselves. And so the concern that his stuff would hurt birds is definitely something we have to analyze. I think that the way that we look at this is probably the sheer tightness and frequency of electricity today. Now, for those of you who don't know why the United States government and China and some other countries in Europe are all hauling ass to 5G. And, believe me, 6G is already being tested in China. The reason why they're doing this is that they know that they want to offer solutions as well as surveillance that is going to need massive information transfer as quickly as possible. The more components that you introduce into a wireless framework, cell phones, cars that have cell phones, smart cars need to do things. They want everything. They want your refrigerator, your blender, the chair you sit in, the bed you lay down in, the faucets that you turned on, the toilets that you flush. They want all the metrics that can possibly be gathered to control you to be gathered, assessed, and used against you. That's the cynical truth of the whole thing. Well, then you have to move trillions upon trillions, just multiplied quadrillions times quadrillions of data per second around the world, and then somehow get it to be stored somewhere. And so the way that we do this is we've created a digital language with the frequency of electricity. And in order to transfer as many highs, lows, and neutrals that we possibly can to create, positive, negatives, and no signal or no data being traveled, they have to increase these frequencies up and down. Remember, 4G's frequency is about 2.5 feet. 5G's frequency is about 1 centimeter. 4G, I think, capped out around 20 billion hertz. 5G is going to cap out at 100 billion hertz. Given that man is under 10 hertz, or 5 to 9, super bad for the human body. Super duper bad. Studies have revealed that, diabetes, hypoglycemia is off the chain. People are having problems concentrating, sleeping, it's bad. Kids are being, destroyed in school with these things. So GPAs are going down. I mean, there's a faction of the world that absolutely loves this. And the interesting thing is the kids that worship their phones, the people that are super juiced about getting a 5G phone, are the same people that are being destroyed by it. We're all being destroyed by it, whether or not you want it to happen or not. And the crazy thing is you have the right to your body. You have the right to your health. And these corporations have basically said, F you, we're going to broadcast this stuff at you, regardless if you like it or not, because we have trillions upon trillions of dollars to make in 1 year. So I don't think necessarily that Tesla would be able to escape some of these imperative things that are happening, these obligatory moments in time where, let's say that Tesla is an American product and he distributes electricity for damn near nothing. He uses the sun and the Earth's core to create all the electricity. And then he broadcasts it into your home, and it all turns into electricity in all your devices the second you need it. Your phone needs power. Well, there's no power meter on your phone. It's just always powered. And you would come to expect all things to be powered up. Everything. There'd be no wires in your house. You wouldn't have any electrical fires necessarily, unless a component was damaged in a way that somehow, when the power got too high, the unit wouldn't have a diode that blows, like a rectifier that blows, or a fuse that blows, or some sort of thing that says, okay, we're over capacitated with electricity. It's time for us to shut down because this thing's about to turn to a flaming ball. You've seen these videos online of all these people with cell phones in their pockets that just explode. I mean, they don't just turn on, like start smoldering in the pocket. They blow up. They make huge sounds. There's one I saw somewhere, I think in Asia. Kid walked in and he's just looking at some stuff in a counter, and all of a sudden his phone goes like a fuse, and then just goes kaboom, and it's blowing his pocket off, taking a chunk out of his thigh. It's bad news, man. And you think, oh, no way could cell phones cause cancer in the breast. Mm-hmm. If you're storing a cell phone for prolonged periods of time on your flesh, you're asking for cancer that is going to be at a very high stage of destruction before you probably ever really notice it. Because the thing is like when I put my cell phone in my back pocket for a couple seconds as I'm carrying it to my car, carrying it from my car, or whatever, I just use it temporarily. My butt cheek is one of the thickest pieces of beef I got on my body, right? Still absolutely bad for the cells there. But I can feel it within 5 seconds, just burning my ass. I can feel it. I can take other objects and put them in my back pockets that aren't electrical, and there's nothing. Until I sit down, it kind of cranks my spine. I used to put my wallet in my back pocket before I realized that was a horrible idea. My chiropractor goes, knock that off. But it never burned a hole in my ass, right? So if you're able to store a cell phone in your bra, in your pocket all day, some dudes, metros put it in their front pockets, and it's sizzling your nuts. Your lymph node network has a huge collection right at your crotch and your inner thighs. And here's this phone right there going, hey, you mind if we get in here? These electrons from the power supply is what's actually hurting your body, not the cell phone call. But again, just so you know, when you're really far away from the tower, your cell phone will quadruple at a minimum the antenna pole that it projects from the phone. The way this thing works is it creates this polar field around your phone, and it's looking for the tower to interrupt the signal with your ID. And so you're listening to, your phone's actually hearing every single phone call in the area that you are. It's just your phone's not picking up on it because it doesn't have a transmission to start the call, to sustain the call, because the IDs don't match. But technically speaking, I mean, people think they're safe, right? I got a digital cell phone. It's all encrypted. Really? Your cell phone is going all over. Your cell phone call is being broadcast once they figure out where you are in your entire neighborhood. So someone listening to that data, decrypting it, you don't think the big boys can do that instantaneously? You need to watch more movies, I guess. I don't know. So the charter of Tesla living, and let's just say that we all like Tesla. We figure out he really did have it all figured out, and he dies in the mid-40s. But that would have given him, say, from 1920 to the mid-40s, about 25 years to establish what it was like to care about man and be empathetic, to set a bar for how electricity is even taught. The college books would have been completely different. Einstein would have never, ever, ever been able to sell his bullshit. Oh, sure, he could steal some relativity patents out of Zurich. Remember, the guy was a third-rate patent clerk, which means he was basically a doorknob padlock kind of guy. That's his full intellect. And they say, oh, well, we know he did really bad in school, but he was a super genius when he went into a room with a whiteboard and a piece of chalk. Just take it from me. Those two stories do not jive whatsoever. If you have a high intellect and a high intelligence and you can deduce anything, you can be tested to figure that out very quickly. And we can test you in ways that you have no pressure. No one's standing over your shoulder. Here's a piece of paper. Here's a pen. Here's an inkwell. Whatever you need to do, Mr. Einstein, get in there and finish the test. We're just going to leave you alone. No time limits, man. You can take a whole week to do this, but we're going to lock away the information in between. But no, he tested out as a third-rate patent clerk. First-rate patent clerk is able to patent or grant a patent for something like relativity. He wasn't that guy. Tesla wrote extensively about the fact that Einstein had gotten rid of the theory of ether, and he flat out said, he goes, look, everything I've ever made was based on ethereal sciences. I'm just stressing that before we go into this because that's the world we would be living in. Kids would learn electricity through ethereal technologies. So the thing is that Tesla would probably not have made it much past 1950. He would have been 90 years old. And he lived a pretty good life, but you read about his death, and he was hit by a car crossing the street, went to the hospital, he came out, was recovering in his hotel room. When asked how bad the impact was of the car, he said, I probably broke a couple ribs or whatever. I'm okay. He's a baller, dude. So he wasn't laid out in hospital with ventilators on him or something like that. He survived to the point he could have a conversation. His mind was working okay. But he was old, man. He had also come up with technology to end wars. His death ray is what we call it today. It's not what he called it back in those days. If you're very inquisitive about Tesla's contribution to that concept, go watch my episode 500 because I cover all of his patents for his entire life, and you'll see the vector of his mindset going towards this. Plus, I extensively integrate into that episode his autobiography written in 1919, 2 years after the Wardenclyffe Tower is torn down. He wrote the words. The books are all over the world, so no one can take it and revise it and re-release it because there are book copies of it around the world. So when I looked at the papers that were given to me, it was very apparent that what he was going to do is reverse the Wardenclyffe Tower. It was going to be taller, skinnier. The top orb on top would have been probably about half the size as his normal Wardenclyffe Tower, and it was going to be a broadcast system. The papers were very inconclusive. There were random formulas for capacitating electricity and dispersing it, but in terms of the physical inner workings of this tower, they weren't covered. The outer workings of the tower were measured. You could just sit there and read how certain panels would be assembled, its thickness, its height, all these kind of things. But with his weapon, what he was basically suggesting, in my opinion, was that he was going to do a directed energy weapon that was going to liquefy certain metals that were conductive, that were going to respond to this frequency. But he would need to shoot a beam towards an approaching Air Force, an approaching Navy, an approaching land invasion. men holding guns. It's very similar to the day the Earth stood still, 1951, where Gort zaps the tanks, the cannons, and the pistol and rifles in the guy's hands. Everything made of metal just vanished in this movie. I can't help to think that the writer was sort of paying homage to Tesla's invention. What I didn't hear Tesla ever say in any of the written interviews, and the best archaeological dig you can do or anthropological study you could do on this guy, historical study, would be to read only his words and then try to make deductions from that point. In addition, if we had John J. Trump's, I think it's his name, Trump's uncle, who was able to go in and seize all of Tesla's laboratory pieces and parts, we may have found some inventions that were undocumented and undescribed in those interviews. And so, it would be interesting to, it's funny, I just watched Young Frankenstein with Gene Wilder, the Mel Brooks movie, and there's sort of a correlation there where Gene Wilder's teaching in a modern university in the United States, and he's being hounded by one of the students who was in Werewolf in London about his crazy grandfather, Dr. Frankenstein, he called himself Frederick Frankenstein, because he just hated his grandfather's legacy. But eventually his grandfather's will is given to him, and he goes to Transylvania, and he's in the castle with Clarice Leachman and Terry Garr and Marty Feldman. And he reanimates Peter Boyle. He also has Gene Hackman in it too for a little scene. I completely forgot Gene Hackman was in there. But he goes into the this amazing set, this big fireplace and stuff. Look like a set out of Citizen Kane. And he gets introduced to a library by Leachman's character, which I can't remember her name. It's a G name. The horses always scream every time her name is read. And he looks at the books and he goes, this is just a normal library. Where's my grandfather's library? And she says, what are you talking about? And he goes, well, all of these books are just incidental books that anyone can buy down at the store. I am sure that my grandfather has a whole nother library with his writings. And eventually he finds it. And he's so excited. He becomes his grandfather. And again, he reanimates Peter Boyle with the abnormal brain. Tesla could have had those, and we simply don't know. But there was a little catch with Tesla. For any of you that saw Malcolm X's Alex Haley Spike Lee movie with Denzel Washington, there was a big thing about there's a big thing about Malcolm X being a bookie in the first phase of his life. It goes in 3 phases. And the dude who's teaching him how to be a bookie said, never write anything down, because if you ever get busted by the cops, you won't have any evidence on you. And so you just keep everything in your head. Tesla was a keep everything inside your head dude at a level that was supernatural. He would design schematics in his head. This is before integrated circuits, so everything was done with wire-to-wire components. There was no circuit. There was no CPUs of any kind. We didn't have silicon circuits or anything like that. So everything was done through external transistors and just all by hand. He could have had a bunch of stuff in his head. The dude was said to have aged ball bearings for up to 2 years in his brain, just every day visiting the ball bearing in his brain going, okay, you would have experienced this much natural damage. So is this the right ball bearing? Should I have more lubrication? Is there a better design to reduce the impact of the ball bearing in its particular position? I mean, crazy stuff. Now, the ball bearing stuff would have been his AC generators as they turned and created this current, essentially taking very conductive metals and using the wind of ether off of this power coming in to then rip off the wave and send it in another path where in coils, like the Tesla coil, every time the coil goes around, it's like amplifying the electricity because it's gathering more wind and more momentum, convincing all the ethereal winds in that area to flow in a particular direction on this substance that's conductive to amplify it up. He helped perfect components to capacitate electricity, to store electricity, because the circuit in an AC wave of power, it's just constant. You don't need necessarily capacitors. When you get into AC, well, the thing's going up and down. It's going in a positive wave and a negative wave. Well, you can't create any circuitry that's going to flow in the negative part of the curve. So you put capacitors on there to store up energy during the up. And then when it goes down, the capacitors just naturally, just like water, flow back into the power, and it creates little humps. And then you can create other situations where you wire enough of these things together with resistors to yank it through, basically creating push and pull mechanisms in the circuit. You start to flatten that curve. And so it doesn't get perfectly smooth like an AC, but it gets damn close to smooth. So this guy could have had plans way beyond anything that we can conceive of. So what would be some of the touch points? I know it took forever to get started there, but I just want to really set your mind up to understand the viability of these suggestions to you. Now, power distribution we've gotten. Wardenclyffe Towers, if you go look it up, it's a pretty huge tower. It's basically what the pyramids were, with perhaps a more useful application. The way he described it was that he's taking a little bit of ethereal collision on a conductive sphere at the top. So ether's going through this thing constantly. If the world is round and it's turning at 1,000 miles an hour, that's creating impact. If the Earth is going through the universe inside the solar system, there's all kinds of movement that we're experiencing right now. So this stuff, and it worked. He proved it in Springfield, Colorado, right? But he grabs a little bit of energy out of the atmosphere, shoves it into the ground, and siphons out of the core of the Earth, which is a big plasma ball of electricity, not nickel iron. And I hate to freak you out, but it's mostly hollow, okay? It's got electricity in there. The white stuff, the stuff that lightning's made out of, is down in there, and it's super duper powerful. When you see a volcano erupt, you'll see lightning bolts come out of volcanoes because it's squirting out from the center of the Earth. Why do lightning bolts come down to the Earth? Well, they're grounding to the inner core, which is made of the same stuff. He takes a little bit, shoves it in the Earth, siphons it out, and then he broadcasts it out to you. Super low frequency. Now, again, we didn't have 5 gigahertz laptops that needed to be powered. And so how he would have refined the Wardenclyffe Tower would have been extremely interesting. So there is a debate. The debate goes like this. Would there be let's say he was able to, within the same space as the 1917 Wardenclyffe Tower, let's say by the year 2000, that thing is still way up in the air because it needs to broadcast it to you. It's got to go down to your house and over to your skyscraper and that sort of thing. I'm willing to bet he would have been able to optimize it probably at least 1/4 of its current size through just optimizing components and needing less power to get done when he needs done, except the stuff he wants to give away. So there could be this model of the universe in the future where every major city, instead of having those transformer stations, which are the step up and step down sections from the power plant that you have, broadcasting to your house. But it's also conceivable, very, very, very conceivable. And we could do this today, most likely. It just depends on your power requirements. Now, there's going to be a little bit of a distinction here. So obviously, the amount of power I use in my house is relative to how many components I have in the house that need power. If I got these lights on right now, it's sucking down more power than when I have them off. But I might be able to have one of these Tesla coils super optimized in my backyard on the top of my house. And then it's just doing what it does, siphoning it. Maybe if at night, I'm not quite sure what the viability of a Wardenclyffe Tower would be in dark. Ether's still there, the core is still there, so it should be pretty consistent. But I'm pretty sure the sun super amplifies the process. But you could have a generator in your house, okay, that capacitates up a ton of power for your nighttime use. But you might have one just on top of your house. It just runs down, almost like a lightning rod. And you don't need any external location selling you any power. You just got it in your home. But then we do travel in our cars. Our cars need power. Even if everything went electric, which we'll get to in a second, you're going to have some globally accessible power. A skyscraper is going to need a lot more power. Imagine a World Trade Center, those giant buildings in Dubai. Well, they're going to have to do a voltage model on the building. They're going to have to figure out, okay, based on daytime generation versus nighttime generation versus daytime consumption versus nighttime consumption, what sort of capacitation would we have to install in the basement, let's just say, in order to store this all up? Maybe it's in the top 5 floors of a 125-story building. Who knows? So it would be interesting because ether is so permeable to all things. I am not personally versed, but it seems to make sense that one could cosmetically hide the Tesla system, the Nikola Tesla system, inside of a glass container, maybe even augment it with certain reflections and that kind of stuff. Not sure. But I'm sure it could be made fairly beautiful. But someone would have had to have taken his technology and understood it intimately, embraced it in the universities instead of making JP Morgan super rich and making the world have all of its environmental problems because of power supplies that we didn't choose for ourselves. Remember, the green movement's bullshit. We don't choose any of that stuff that makes it non-green. The people that are paying off this movement to tax you to death want you to use your taxes to pay for their new system, and they're going to blame you the entire time. So instead of Greta talking to us, she should be talking to her boss and saying, hey, dude, you're the one choosing all this stuff. Get to it. But there may very well need to be sort of a redundant system. Because imagine this. Imagine the Wardenclyffe Tower has really 2 functions. It has the siphoning function, which can be capacitated or immediately spent based on your needs. And then you might have a broadcast system that will send it to someone else to then take the low wave frequency, grab it, and juice its frequency up using coils and all kinds of other things to get it to be vibrating enough to technically should probably be, again, you could transpose it into DC at some point to be used, right? It could be pure DC by the time it's consumed. It just depends on how you build it, how you put it all together. He never got the chance to really put it together. And there are guys on the internet that will show you sort of living room versions of this thing, and it's really, really cool. But again, as we drive our cars, if you're on the beach, let's just say, you're not going to have the ability to tap into the crust of the earth necessarily. So you may need some broadcast stations around, but they might be very petite, very small, almost just as incidental as like a road sign. No big deal. Well, there it is right there, So beaches, national parks, highways, all just have little repeater towers that just broadcast to you. I'm pretty sure, based on everything I ever read about his equations of transferring electricity, it seemed massively low frequency compared to what we're doing today with all this cell phone stuff. So I think that disturbing the natural genetics of insects and birds and fish, I'm assuming we're not in any super duper threat model for them, but we'd have to study it. We'd have to study however we decide to put this stuff together. Now, the other probably top priority for this dude would, if he was embraced instead of cock-blocked, then his, we call it the death ray, would most likely be built to prevent aggressors. But the second that the enemies of the world, all of us are enemies of somebody, unfortunately, at least according to our leaders, it's a moot point. Even missiles coming in from another country would be a moot point. They'd be disassembled the second they were launched, so why even build them? Why spend any time doing that? Now, could you build a bomb and hide it in a city and turn it on? I guess. Nuclear material is pretty easy to sense, right? Remember, I told you guys the story. If you watch Netflix, there's a border crossing reality show they made. If you watch the episodes from Canada, a woman got pulled out of her car like she was some terrorist, and she had essentially had an isotope treatment on her body. And as she drove her car through the turnstiles, there's a sensor on the car, and it went boom, and it was like a minuscule amount of isotope in her body. Someone getting chemotherapy would set it off. So spare me how you would completely shield some nuclear core. Now, the interesting thing is that with just 110 volts coming out of your house in America, we get everything done, don't we? I think, again, it's 240 for Europe, and like most major appliances are around 280. And so, again, I'm not sure exactly how this would all be calibrated for that. At that point, to have 110, and the thing is, if it all topped out at 110, if 110 is the safest way to broadcast this, well, then Europe would have taken 110 instead of 240. I'm sure they have no problem with that. Just, can I turn on my refrigerator? Can I turn on my TV? Yes. And by the way, there's no wires, nothing's plugged into your wall, but you're going to get exactly what you need, and you can metabolize that up with other components internally to get your 5 gigahertz computers. The other thing is that I want to remind you that power and the accessibility of power is a huge no-no for the globalists. And this isn't crazy. A guy named Michael Rupert, who was responsible for waking me up, and I just talked to my friend who showed me that VHS tape way back in 2003. She doesn't even remember bringing it. Really funny. So I always tell you guys, because people ask me, when did you first wake up? It's because of her bringing this tape. She doesn't remember it. She fell asleep while I was playing it. It's not her game. She's all positive in this world and doesn't care about this stuff. Thank God. It's a man's job, right? But he made the correlation before he killed himself in, I think, early 2015, that the access of power, especially power that's used to travel from point A to point B, is a catalyst for population growth, because we get to inhabit all the nooks and crannies of the world. And so giving out infinite power to the world to facilitate travel, which is our next subject matter here, is a big deal. So what forms of travel do we have, and what is the geographical proximity to coastlines to be able to broadcast to these vehicles power? Well, I think it's pretty safe to say that a network of these refined Wardenclyffe towers would be easily distributed across the continent so that cars, vehicles of all kinds run on power, no problem. The question starts where you have ships in the ocean that'll be way out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. You have airplanes, aircraft in general, that might be consuming, depending on if they're fighter jets or SR-71s or just commercial jets or private jets. What's the deal? I mean, what can we do? What can we do? Okay, well, now we got to look at things like elevations, altitudes for the planes. With the ships in the middle of the ocean, it's sheer, how far away is this thing? When the ocean goes 3 to 7 miles into the ground, 3 to 7 miles deep before you hit the ground, and water is not going to transfer this stuff easily, as far as I know, then you get into stuff like the HARP antenna system. HARP, which was patented in 1958, with all kinds of crazy applications, like creating earthquakes, mind control, controlling weather, basically destroying storms, creating storms. It's a freaky piece of technology, okay? But in a Tesla world, it wouldn't be weaponized. It would be used to, let's just say we all got on board, right? We ended up liking being peaceful creatures. We could be broadcasting energy directly to patches of ocean, creating sort of corridors where these vehicles would work. A sailboat could just go anywhere it wants to go. And there are folks that do that, right? It would be the same, some sort of like unplugged version of travel. I think that would actually work because we would just put, like where we distribute airstrips all over the place for emergency landings. There's all kinds of airstrips you don't have any clue exist, and they're there for contingency landing situations, right? I once talked to a dude in Hawaii in 2013 who worked in aviation, and he was a contingency guy, but he actually covered for a buddy the night that Flight 800 was shot down by a missile. And he flat told me to my face, he goes, look, it was shot down by a Navy missile. It was a mistake. It was an accident. They were doing tests, and they shot a missile, and it took down the plane. He goes, the NTSB shows up the next day, makes us all sign all these gag orders, and we all knew what was going on because we saw I guess they had tracked the missile at some point. He didn't have the triangle of the actual plane, but he had the one right next to it. And of course, he's got access to that person, and he's normally a contingency guy, so he had access to information. He just told me, he just kind of looked around a little bit. So I'm assuming for at least trade routes, we would be able to broadcast in a pretty wide spectrum energy to a particular area. And if we were to take some of the capacitation theories of skyscrapers and put them in the ships, if they had wandered out of the corridor of where they're going to get free energy from these systems, they could use the stored up energy to get themselves back on track. And the interesting thing about the HARP antenna is that it's designed to be able to point the energy at different regions. So you could actually have a ship that's gone off course, and you could take one of the contingency broadcasting antenna arrays and then point it right at that ship and get him on his way. So I think that ships, we could do that. What I don't know, because I don't know any experiment that I could actually point to, we know radar is pretty damn powerful, right? But flight is something that no one wants to have a situation where maybe you get to your destination. Maybe you have some power. You can't afford to have a ship in the sky go out of some range of its energy resource and fall out of the sky for even a split second. Because sometimes, obviously, you can't recover from those sorts of problems. So I'm unaware of exactly how, 30,000, 40,000 foot altitude of a normal commercial airline, depending if it's domestic or international, is going to survive the point-to-point journey. The other thing is just contingencies on the ground. So let's say we're all broadcasting in the sky, and it totally works, but there's a tornado that rips through a particular area, or there's a storm that's over, and all that moisture is just insulating the power distribution. We may have to stick with some sort of kerosene/jet fuel to be able to keep those in the sky. The other reality that no one will ever tell you, because they don't know this is the case, because they've been working very diligently to keep us very ignorant about it, is that oil is not a fossil fuel whatsoever. Oil is a natural byproduct of the core of the earth. And so there's a little stipulation here. We currently pump that out of the ground, turn it into gasoline, oil, a bunch of other stuff, and we use it up just as fast as the earth makes it nowadays, right? In most locations. Can we drain it faster than it creates? Oh, absolutely. So you can have a peak oil situation, but it's not peak as in it's all gone. It's just you're going to have to sit around and wait for their world to make some more. But now imagine that starting in let's say, they had electric cars all the way back to the beginning of cars. They did. But let's just say by 1925, because the Warncliffe Tower is a big success, he's got 8 years to incubate it up. They start replacing car engines that have petrol motors with electric batteries. And Tesla gets a chance to work on it. He's well financed. He guides people so they can run off and do it while he goes off to create some other new thing. We wouldn't need a bunch of oil like we do now for all the cars. Boom, gone. All the houses in various parts of the world that use oil, gone for heating, right? Just gone. Lubricating an engine, a little bit, but not much. They can treat metal to be lubricated for its entire existence. They can. meaning the wear and tear in a motor will take the motor out before the lubrication of the parts wears out. They figured this out in the 50s. Go study Stan Meyer, and one of his speeches, he completely reveals it. And I have talked to engineers that know this is the case. So I'll remind you, if you want to debate the fossil fuel issue, again, all life stops at 16,000 feet. And they're telling you there's oil down, 7 miles, 8 miles, 9 miles if you go to Russia. And so there's no way that stuff's down there if there's no ferns and dinosaur bones down there rotting to create oil. It's just an absurd concept. It's methane gas compressed to make crude oil. And all we do is we refine it to reduce the amount of carbon that's been added to it through compaction, compression, and then you have various octanes in the pipe. It's just right in front of your face. Okay. Now, if you ever saw the Beverly Hillbillies back in the 60s, you have that old song. Jeb became a millionaire, moved to Beverly Hills, right? And they said he took a shot at, he's hunting out in his land. He takes a shot and he hits the ground and it bubbles up. Now, did any of you see that when you were a kid and go, what? He shot the ground and the ground started bubbling crude oil? And you're like, man, I have dug in the ground 1,000,000 times. So have my friends. So has my family. So has the world. No one has crude oil just pop out of the ground. Well, if you reverse engineer that story to when he supposedly did this, it's still not quite in his time frame. It would have had to have been in the probably late 1800s. But there were, lakes of crude oil in Texas. One of the reasons why we're able to live there today is because we have pumped it all out of the ground and it all drained out. We refined it, got rid of it, put pumps in, so as fast as it regenerates, it's gone, it's sold. But if we impacted tremendously the crude oil production, the crust of the earth, the crust of the earth would most likely regain these pools of crude oil, and we'd have to pump it and do something with it, put it back in the ground, do something with it in order to make sure that we could live in certain areas. Otherwise, it'd be a real stinky field over there. If any of you have ever smelled crude oil raw, my family has a big oil side to it, or at least did. We now lease the land to be pumped. But it's some pretty stinky stuff, But if travel continued to be a thing we could do, however we solve the problem, again, maybe planes have to continue using oil products, then the population is going to continue exploding on this planet. The thing you got to worry about with population explosion is that even though you think, okay, maybe you accurately think, hey, in most areas of the world, it's not overpopulated. China is definitely overpopulated. India is definitely overpopulated. At least the way they manage their society, the way they build their cities. India, though, is supposed to be building like 5 Chicagos a year or something. They're blowing up, but they're also procreating into those cities, so it's not really solving any problems. It's just distributing it for now, right? Population goes up exponentially. Well, you can't keep up with that. The population starts going straight up to the point where you're duplicating the world population in shorter and shorter periods of time. We do have a limit to the amount of food we can create. We do have a limit to the amount of resources we can create. Yeah, you can go into the ground, you can build skyscrapers to store people. With Tesla, though, those cities would never run out of electricity to do things. In terms of growing food, well, you can't keep up with it. You just can't. And this is the huge concern of the world elite, and which is why their argument is, and it's accurate, but it's probably not as close as we think it is, but it's not as far away as we think it is, which is we aren't overpopulated yet, right? We're barely a fungus on the surface of this planet, but within very short order, 500 years, we could be a Borg planet. And then if you get to that point, you're going to have health issues. Flu will activate and become a killer. Like H1N1 is the flu that is literally designed to keep population down. The more human beings that bang into each other, the more stressed they become. Flu mutates and turns into a killer. And it's not until it kills off enough human beings, which is why birds get it, that proximity of collision starts to reduce. Stress starts to reduce. And once that happens, then flu can, within 2 weeks, can mutate back to its natural state of just being pretty inert and kind of makes you sick. So living responsibly would have to be another evolutionary thing that would have to come out of being aware of each other in a much better way. I've been told that the continent of Africa has not been allowed to have a single nuclear power plant, but it's the biggest continent in the world. I've been told the reason why that is the case is they don't want the elite of the world, and I'm going to be quoting from their book, so please don't take any offense from me, that they don't want the primitives in that continent, not every single region, but whatever. They don't want them to overpopulate because they know energy creates population growth. And so they don't want that to just explode without taking some of those cultures that are maybe 100,000 years in the past and getting them up to like, hey, you're scientists now, you're doctors now, you're engineers now. Or, I don't know enough about the variables. One can make an uninformed opinion based on just kind of like glancing at the situation. But I know that the more modern areas have the same exact level of irresponsibility. It's because it's subconscious to us. We're not told, hey, Mormons, when you create 5 to 10 kids, you're increasing the world population tremendously. Now, today, I don't think it's a huge problem in modern countries because modern kids don't want any kids. Or if they do, they want one. I just heard a story today, as a matter of fact, technically yesterday, that said that there was a family that had some kids or had one child, and the child was such a terror for them that they literally said, I don't want to do this ever again. And they didn't have a second kid. So what other areas would Tesla have severely impacted our future? And again, the more you go away from his death, which I think, let's say that he didn't get hit by a car and he lived another 10 years, which I think would have put him at 56, right? 1956. Well, we're still pretty primitive in 56. We don't even have a single pixel on a screen yet. Ivan Sutherland would do that in the 60s. And it takes time to push that into an arcade game, to push that into a computer monitor, that kind of stuff, right? Which is why when you look at like old Star Trek episodes from the 60s and they want to show you a computer interface, it's either a painting that's being backlit or it's one of those turnstile numbers like an old pinball machine. But in comes computers. Again, power is going to be just fine for those devices. War, let's just say, was at least kept at bay while these death rays were assembled and put on coasts, and there's peace treaties that could be signed because there's no point anymore. Nuclear weapons, why? Tesla's whole idea was that if you read his autobiography and then the interviews with him, because that's 1919, that's just at the end of World War I. And the dude was brilliant. I mean, if you listen to my episode, he talks about, his homeland was attacked with bioweapons, gas weapons, or at least it was threatened to be attacked by them. And he sat down and thought about the diffusion of gas weapons in the atmosphere. And he told his people, when the armies come and you think you can't win, or you think they're going to use these bioweapons on you, you need to go up into the mountains, the surrounding mountains, get in the trees. Because he said, look, the wind travels different in these areas. And he said that you got to get low to the ground or you got to climb up, depending on what kind of stuff they're using. I mean, he really thought through like how to avoid things. So he was really into being very peaceful. And of course, he thought that the world being at war was just the most asinine thing that man could do. Because here he is generating one patent after another, changing the world, going, guys, you don't even know what I'm doing. I'm creating these components, or I'm perfecting an existing component to the point we're going to be able to create amazing inventions. There's this bright future that's coming, and you guys are worried about killing each other, right? So the story goes that when he felt Hitler brewing, and I don't think anyone knew about Pearl Harbor, he went to Europe, he went to the United States, he kept trying to get meetings with people, and of course, they're organizing this war for all kinds of economic and power structures changes. If you listen to most of my episodes, I think that Bill Maher. Is that the guy? No, it was Mars. I think it's his name. He's dead now. His brother writes books too, which I think are a little more esoteric and symbolic, and he follows all the demonic symbolization of the world. But he wrote a book called The Fourth Reich, and it, I think, accurately assesses that Hitler was a creation to keep Stalin from rolling over Europe. And that's why France laid down in 2 seconds, because the Rothschilds and all the big money changers were there. And it was actually a command from them to him saying, get your ass to Paris, load us up with all your troops, because if Stalin gets here first, he's going to rip this place apart. And he's going to claim it for his own. We're never getting this place back. And that's why that happened. And that's why I think most of us look at history and go, why did they lay down so fast? And of course, there was a French resistance because they're the normal people like you and I going, WTF, like what's going on here, you know? But they weren't interested in his weapon. But if he had gotten his weapon together, Hitler would have been leveled. His planes would have been disintegrated. His tanks would have been disintegrated. Everything that dude made for his army would have been disintegrated. The collateral damage would have been very interesting too. Imagine Tesla was able to put this in a plane with like a single charge or something. So instead of a bombing run, they just zap a factory and the whole factory just turns to dust, or, you know, it's impaired enough that it can't make anything. You turn the lathe and it just falls apart, you know. But he said that he can knock planes out of the sky just shy of 300 miles away. That's pretty amazing. So you have a fleet trying to come in on you and you just zap them. Or 300 miles, man, they would have been able to clear out the coast for Omaha and Normandy, and, you know, that little, the channel distance from Great Britain to Europe. They would have been able to blast deep into that area. But, you know, you're talking about all the appliances and homes all disappearing. If they're built of any steel, doors would just fall off the walls, you know. So that would have been an interesting thing. So I know that there's been a lot of speculation, and I covered this in the Tesla episode, about rumors, okay, that Tesla had made mention of a time distortion during his Colorado Springs experiment, where he did this siphoning thing with the core of the Earth, and he created a lightning bolt that was basically never going to stop until his assistant pulled a breaker and broke the circuit, apparently letting it last 60 seconds before the circuit was broken. And there's, you know, rumors of him saying that he was in some sort of time bubble, and when he looked over at his assistant going for the switch, that it was all slow motion, as if Tesla's going fast and he's going slow. The effect you really want, if you want to live longer, is that your assistant goes super fast and you go super slow. That's the one you want, because then you live longer inside this little electronic bubble. Here's the problem with that entire thing. That happens in the 1910s, this experiment. And he wrote his autobiography in 1919, and he's interviewed several times after that 1919 book. Tesla, although very humble and a great guy, definitely did not like people doubting his intelligence. When Marconi gets the full credit for creating the radio, he goes, yeah, well, he's using like 60 of my patents. I got the number wrong, but it's somewhere in there, you know. He invented it, but whatever. Now, before Marconi got the credit for creating the radio, Tesla had created a remote control boat with a remote control, a battery in the boat, battery in the controller. He created a communication protocol to the boat. So not only transmitting data to the boat, but a protocol that says turn left, turn right, turn on your engine, turn off your engine, rudder, you know, it's just like, I just don't think he cared about creating the application of the technologies as much as the components that were going to make it easier to control this stuff called ether. Now, how many sci-fi shows have you seen where, especially Star Trek episodes, where there's one where they arrive at a planet, I think it's Star Trek. There's a Space 1991 that's very, very similar to this. Both of them might have done it, but they're trying to descend to a planet, and they find out it's got a force field around it. And then when they finally get through the force field and meet the people down below, either through amicable conversations or whatever it was, the story is that their ancestors built a shield to protect them from being invaded by someone. And so it's this old piece of technology that's still around that's just bulletproof. Well, that's sort of how I view his death ray thing. It's an array of death rays. In terms of time travel, he never talked about time travel effects of any kind in any of the interviews that I ever found. And again, these are published in newspapers, they're published in magazines a lot. So these pieces of paper still exist in someone's cupboard somewhere. So when you want to revise history, it's very difficult to say, oh, no, the article said this, when you got a copy of it. And we know YouTube has got people that go out there and they forensically find everything that was ever written. But I guarantee you by 1919, he's talking about the most minuscule thing in his life. How illnesses perfected his mind, how he would see overlaid realities on this reality. I mean, it was exactly how he thought as a human being was documented in these books. So if he had had a time anomaly, I assure you, he would have mentioned it to us. And there's no mention of it. So when you have these rabbit holes that you go down about this guy and they're suggesting all this stuff, there's, you've always heard that dead men tell no tales. And that is usually used in a capacity to say, we will write history because we are the victors. But the inverse is also true. If you want to build up a history that didn't happen, that glorifies someone, you love the guy, you love the girl, you love whoever it is. Well, they're not there to defend themselves, so they didn't have anything to do this. Now, take like Madame Curie, who was responsible for really discovering conclusively that radiation is a natural thing in bars of uranium. I'm sure she wrote something before she passed, but I have never run into Madame Curie's autobiography. Books about her are written. She's usually mentioned inside other books to demonstrate the technology so we understand who she was and how brilliant she was. Today, we have sensationalized profit, right? Obviously, fake organizations or organizations that are trying to tell you they're telling you the truth, but they're not. They're selling advertising, all that kind of stuff. Well, there's plenty of YouTube channels where the same thing occurs. How many times have you seen an intoxicating thumbnail that shows you something, and then you end up clicking into the video, watch the whole thing through, and that thumbnail never arrives in the video? Someone has photoshopped something together to get you to watch it. And actually now, YouTube, if you pay attention, they actually have a little interface to report the video as being misleading. That's why I don't try to make custom thumbnails. It takes a lot of time because I would make sure that they're all perfect, but how am I going to make a thumbnail for half the things that I discuss, right? I mean, just be really pointless. You'd be trying to figure out the thumbnail before you click inside. I'd probably get a lot more subscribers that way, but I'd probably piss off more subscribers that way. So in terms of John J. Trump, or whatever his middle initial is, going into his apartment in New York, confiscating all of his stuff, and suddenly finding the death ray as a big surprise, and then finding time travel stuff that it's been incubated into what's called Project Looking Glass, which is a piece of AI software to assess all of your DARPA information into a Minority Report prediction of future crimes. I'm guaranteeing you right now, with my instinct of really diving deep in this dude, he would have told us. He wouldn't have been able to resist. He would not have been able to resist it, especially as he got older and was listening to people saying, I mean, the guy was interviewed for 20 years and he got the question, what do you think about Marconi inventing the radio? And, to him, he was like, oh, he put a voice over it and suddenly he invented it. So, and there's situations where two guys will think of the same thing. But since Marconi used a ton of Tesla's patents, and what was funny is there's a great show out there from the late 80s, early 90s called The Secret Life of, and then it's sewing machines or refrigerators or whatever it is. Brilliant show, man. It's a British BBC show. And when the dude covers the radio, he doesn't mention Tesla once. Why? Because Tesla was an American dude. He puts a lot of American things in his episodes for some reason, but to give away that British claim to fame was not going to be had in his situation, right? So you can just see the bias. And we do it too, man. We do it too. I'll remind you that the Wright brothers, who invent the plane, basically the one that becomes the keystone to flight, they had flown in, was it 1903? 42 feet in the air, took a picture of themselves doing it, took it immediately down to the patent office. Patent office was told by the Navy at the time that flight was impossible, don't give it to them, because they wanted to patent it. They want to pay dudes every time they want to make a plane. So one of the brothers took it over to the World's Fair in France, flew it. The government of France goes, we're going to patent this. We'll give it to you. Your country is a bunch of morons. As soon as this goes over the airwaves that this happened, the American Patent Office takes the pending patent application that was turned down and immediately stamps it and uses the 8 to 9 hour difference to claim the fame. So this kind of shenanigan stuff happens all the time. There's plenty of, for all intents and purposes, perpetual motor engines out there. They won't allow that to be patented because it acknowledges that you can get, again, relatively perpetual motor engines to run. And when I say relatively, it's like, what if you could create a perpetual motor that needed power once every 24 hours? But for 24 hours, you could use this magnets on magnets thing to spin, and it's going to spin for 24 hours. You make a big, gigantic one, it could spin for a month. Well, yeah, it's not perpetual in the case that it will run forever, but it runs long enough to create power for free. Again, power equals population growth. Population growth is something we don't even know how to deal with, that it's what the elite call the draconian level. And their big thing, which, you know, it has merit, it just doesn't have merit in the next year or 20 years or whatever, is that if we did overpopulate, either we're going to get killed off by our own diseases that are going to mutate to kill us, or someone has to step in to take a bunch of people over a certain age and just go, I'm sorry, you're too old to live. Boom. And it turns into Logan's Run. Renew. We don't want those worlds, which is why this kiss of death that the elite play with us is really just proof that they are abject morons when it comes to the long play, which is, thing is, we know, I mean, I'm just going to end this on like just a generic point, because we kind of sifted up to that point. If you think there's other things that Tesla would have done, let me know. The last person on earth to think evil thoughts is a happy person. And so if you built a society that had equality across the board, no matter what race you are, no matter what continent you live on, what sex you are, any other metrics you can think of, as long as everyone's cool, their bellies are full, their health is good, we all accept that, you know, a husband and wife could have 2 kids, and that's really it. That's a handful, man. And they know that a lot of people are going to have no kids, and a lot of families are going to have 1 kid. They're going to take 2 to 1. They're going to reduce the world population naturally. Maybe they lottery ticket those opportunities off like they do liquor licenses, right? Then no one's going to mess with the people who are at the top. Who cares? You want to run all the world? You want to have everything? You want to have a little bit more than me, but I got everything I need. Plus, you know, which would include your lusts as well, up to a point. We stopped running television shows like The Rich and Famous. We stopped showing Monaco off where, you know, I used to date a girl that was married to a billionaire before she met me. And, you know, they had a 100-foot yacht to go to Monaco. 2 people, 20 people on the boat to take care of the boat. I don't personally need a vacation like that. And if you do, go check yourself, man. You do not need that. You want to go to Monaco? Fine, go. There's a hotel room. You can, you know, this is where it is. But even if they said, look, there's a place where the rulers of the world want to go, and just for the sake of privacy, it's a private city. You can't get in there. Don't think too much about it. We'll make plenty of little videos so you feel like you've seen it. We'll do VR walkthroughs just so you can feel like you've been to our hotels. You'll realize it ain't that fancy. We don't care. Well, most of the mansions these people live in are in the Stone Ages when you go inside, you know. But if they just balance the place out, I think this place would become very, very peaceful and very easy to control. But instead, they're operating from old wartime playbooks because they're not that intelligent. They want you to think they are, but they're really not, which is why someone like Tesla gets ganked. So anyway, hope you dug it. Weather's really nice right now. It's about 60 degrees out. It's pretty cool. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning. Nice and quiet out here. So if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. Losing my voice, I'm going to give you a short bumper. It's got everything you need. That's all you need to know. To the Patreons, thank you so, so much. A lot of cool things you get when you're a Patreon. There's a new section on the website called Suggested Content. Still need to add a bunch of new stuff. But until next episode, take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.